All right, so last session of the day, we have Margaret and Anita talking to us about gender inclusivity in software engineering.
Thank you. Hi, thank you. Actually, it's gender inclusivity software engineering. So think of it as an adjective. How do you do that kind of software engineering? So as the title suggests, this is a, oh, that's for Anita. This is an action-oriented talk. And so what we're going to be doing is providing lots of ways that you might find, sort of a smorgasbord of ways that you might find to take action based on this gender mag method, which we've been talking about a bit. So let's get started. So gender and software, how do these even relate? So it turns out that most software has gender bias bugs. And so now what we have is a worried software developer thinking about their workload. And they're going, you're kidding. Oh no, more work, where? And the answer is in the software that you all are creating. And by you all, I'm talking about software developers and everybody else who helps to create that software. So that's bad. And not only is it in the software that you all are creating, but it's also in the tools that you are using to create it. So the software developer is worried, thinking about their workload, and they're saying, well, how much does this really matter? And the answer is a lot. Because when there are gender bias bugs embedded in software and tools, what these are is they are imposing a cognitive tax that the people experiencing them are paying every time they run into one of these bugs, slowing them down, making them less productive. So that is bad. There's another reason to care though, and that is if you pay attention to these bugs and fix them, your software gets better. So we've talked about curb cuts more than once at this event, and here we are again in curb cut territory. And so it's actually quite well known in the design science community that if you focus on an underserved population and focus really hard on just them, you find things that actually benefit everyone. And of course, curb cuts are your classic example, invented back in, I don't know, probably about the 60s to help people like this person in a wheelchair. And they said, whoa, these shouldn't help, or these shouldn't be the kinds of things people in wheelchairs have to deal with. Curb cuts were born, and they did help people in wheelchairs. So that's awesome. And of course, they helped people with wheeled walkers too, which is great. And they helped people pushing strollers with babies in them. And they helped people on bicycles. And they helped people pushing heavy bales of hay on with their dollies. And they helped people who have those wheeled suitcases. You've seen those, right? Yeah, okay. So better sidewalks for everyone. Okay, so hopefully you all are very inspired. You now want to take these inclusivity bugs out, and you're ready to take action, but first let me tell you what not to do. Shrink it and pink it. This is not a good strategy. You can find this very easily on the web. It's a real thing. One great example, Dell's pink laptops, 2009. So Dell decided they wanted, I guess, more money from people. They wanted from women. They wanted to expand their market. So they said, great idea. We're going to paint our laptops pink, or at least a certain number of them. And we're going to have a website to go with recipes and stuff. It's going to be awesome. Okay, guess how awesome this was? Guess how long it took them to take down that website from the time they released it? Just guess. 3 days. Guess smaller. 10 minutes. Actually, that's a little too small. It was 20 minutes. 20 minutes before they took it down. And keep in mind, this was 2009. This was before the age of Twitter, okay? And the outcry was that great. Then there's Bic for her. Woohoo! So Bic decided they would like to have women spend more money on their pens. So they said, okay, awesome idea. We'll come up with some pink pens and purple pens, and we'll put sparklies on them and a label for her. And we'll raise the price. So that's what they did. You all know Ellen, the talk show host. She wrote this great blog about it. Perhaps you've run across it. It starts like this. Oh, my feeble hand. And she goes on to sarcastically say how these pens have empowered her life. Okay, there's so many other examples of shrink it and pink it. There are sources you can cite that investigate this. So don't do that. No kidding. When I talk to people about this, sometimes they say, so should we paint our website pink? And they mean it. So please, please, please don't let them go down that road. And here is one reason, one of so many reasons why that can't work. It's because nobody is typical. And so the world just doesn't divide into typical females and males or women and men or anything else. And so what that says is no matter what you do, no matter how you try to come up with a version of something or other for men and something or other for women, or something for short people and something for tall people, or any kind of binary thing, what happens is most people don't really fit in either side. So you can't really do that. It can't be about dividing in multiple versions. It has to be about debugging, taking down inclusivity barriers or inclusivity bugs, as we call them. Okay, you just think of it as a debugging problem. Okay, so how do we find inclusivity bugs? Well, have we got a deal for you? The GenderMag method, it's free. GenderMag stands for Gender Inclusiveness Magnifier. It is a method. This isn't a software package, it's a method, a software process, if you will, to evaluate the inclusiveness of tools and software that you are building in the setting that there is a person sitting in front of the computer trying to solve a problem. Okay? Any setting like that is applicable for GenderMag. That means tools for programmers, IDEs, decision support software, security setting software. That's what we actually invented it for. But actually, it turns out that most user interfaces are so obtuse, even though people didn't bring problems to the computer, now they've got them. Now that they're there, so they're problem solving too. So it turns out to work in almost all software. Anyway, so it's a method that you use in that situation to evaluate the software that you are helping to create, or the tools. GenderMag is based on 5 cognitive facets that are brought to life in 3 personas, Abby, Tim, and the Pats. And these personas are customizable, as you'll see in a minute. And as I said, it's all based on cognitive styles that are favored by various people, and these tend to cluster statistically by gender. And then there is a gender specialized cognitive walkthrough, which is a really long-standing evaluation method, and it brings together the facets, the personas, and the process into one thing. So how do you do it? Well, you start by picking a persona. I pick Abby, okay, done. You pick a use case or a scenario that you would like to evaluate in this software you're trying to evaluate. So here is one example. This is like a Google map for inside a bookstore, and some of my students were working on this. So that's the application they're trying to evaluate, and their scenario or use case is Abby wants to find science fiction books. Okay, so here we go. So you walk through that scenario with the sub-goals and actions the developer of the tool wishes Abby would take, like this. So you turn to the developers and you say, developers, what do you wish Abby wanted to do if she's seeing that screen? And they say, we hope that Abby wants to see a bookstore map. So then what we do is we just ask the evaluators in the room, will Abby have this sub-goal? Yes, no, maybe, and why? And so one of the things that's different from a traditional cognitive walkthrough is maybe, okay? So if we're interested in inclusive software, we also want a process that's inclusive. So we want to harvest the opinions of everyone in the room, not just the loudest voice. So it's not an argument, it's a union. Okay? All right, so we write it all down, and not only the opinion about whether she's going to have that, but also why. And that ties to the cognitive styles that are enumerated in detail on the persona, which you'll meet in a minute. Okay, after we write all that stuff down, even if Abby didn't have that sub-goal before, now we make her have it. So a persona is a fake person. We do get to shove things into their heads if we want to. So we push that into her head, and then we say, if she had that sub-goal, what actions happen in the fingers, okay? What actions do we want Abby to take? And here's the set of developers. They're saying, I want her to push browse off. Okay, this may seem a little unintuitive. They were students. That's why they need me. Okay, but that's what they wanted. And so then we again ask, will Abby do this? Yes, no, maybe, and why? We refer to her facets, write it all down, and then we make her do it. And after we make her do it, we say if she sees the following result. Do I have the following result? I'm not sure if I do. Then we ask if she'll see progress. Yes, no, maybe, and why? And now we're done. Those 3 questions. Sub-goal, the first action, will she feel like she's making progress? The next action, so on and so forth, until the scenario is done. And what you've written down is your inclusivity bug report. Here's one reason that one of our previous developers wrote down. They said, no, Abby's not going to do that. Her learning style is not pushing and poking on things. Okay, so I've told you that, that we have these personas that bring to life these cognitive styles. The 5 of them, we refer to these as facets, are their motivations, not how motivated they are, but why are they sitting in the chair? Okay, what brought them to this software? Their information processing style, their computer self-efficacy, their risk aversion, and their learning style in learning new technology, whether it's tinkering or something else. We won't go through all of these. I'm just going to take you through 1 or 2 of them. First thing I want you to notice is my fancy, wonderful animation. For those of you who aren't particularly sighted, I now have a horizontal line in the middle of my wonderful persona. Don't try to read all this. It's little tiny print. But I do want you to notice it fits on 1 screen. That's intended for busy software developers, okay? And it has bullet points and boldface too. Really trying to bring out what's important and make it efficient. The top half is entirely, well, almost entirely customizable. So you change that to whatever job title, picture, gender, experience level, interest, whatever you want. But one thing that you can't change is that the software that this persona is trying to experience is new to her. Okay, or him or whoever. Okay, you can't change that because that's kind of an underlying assumption of the cognitive walkthrough itself. All right, so it's new to that person. Maybe they're brand new at the company. The bottom half you cannot change because those are Abby's cognitive styles. If you don't want to use those cognitive styles, then you switch to a different persona like Pat or Tim. But we're just talking about Abby right now. Abby, I'm going to tell you about her attitude toward risk. So Abby rarely has spare time. She is a super busy person. And so she's risk averse about using unfamiliar technologies. She's totally fine with technologies that she already knows, but very, very averse about unfamiliar technologies because they might cause her to have to spend extra time on them, and she does not have extra time. So let's look at some data behind it. This is some data from a fairly recent study, just 1 study in this slide here, but each one of our facets have at least 5 independent empirical studies behind them, so they're very well researched. Anyway, this one, the blue bars were men and the yellow bars were women. Those were the only 2 genders in this particular study. And as you can see, well, the first thing you can see is some people are risk tolerant, some are somewhere in the middle, some are very averse, and you can see that there are more women on the very averse and more men on the very risk tolerant side. But you can also see there is a ton of overlap. And so what that says, once again, is this is all about inclusivity. This is not about dividing people up, because we just can't say that women are one way and men are some other way and other genders are some other way. Look at how much difference there is within any one gender. So it has to be about taking down barriers, not about dividing people up. Okay, but still, as you can see, the distributions are very different statistically, and so when we talk about statistical differences, it's because of that. Okay, so Tim's job as a persona is to look out for the interests of all of the people who are risk tolerant, regardless of whatever else comes with them. And Abby's job is to look out for the interests of all of those people who are risk averse, and the Pats pick up the middle. Now there is a vertical line that I've added there, and it separates the Tim side of the graph from the rest of the people. Now suppose hypothetically that the software you were building supported only risk-tolerant people. In that case, how many of the men in this sample would it support? Well, a little under half, okay, 42%. And how many of the women in this sample would it support? Only a quarter. This is why we say that supporting cognitive diversity is also supporting gender diversity, because mostly software that's out there is only supporting the Tim side of the graph, okay? So really and truly, that other side, it's not being considered. Now, the facets are not as static as I've talked about them so far. These are 4 of the 5 that we have here. Risk we just talked, well, 4 of the 5. Anyway, they are very dependent not only on individuals, but also on the situation that the individual is in. So one of the other facets is called information processing style. Abby is very bursty. So when people have a problem that they're trying to solve, a lot of times they feel like they need to gather more information, and there's more than one way of doing that. One way is to gather information in teensy little drips and act upon each one of them right away, knowing that you might be wrong, but it's okay, you're willing to backtrack if you see you're going down some wrong path. That is not Abby, that's Tim. And that's who most software is designed for. Abby, on the other hand, is called a comprehensive information processor. She likes to get her head around a problem before she starts going forward, so she's kind of a planner, okay? Both of these styles are very good styles, but it turns out that a lot of them are not supported by today's software. So now I've just described Abby and her style, but Anita here is very different from Abby. So let's let Anita talk to you about some stuff that she does.
I'm going to poke buttons too. All
yeah.
right.
Is your mic on?
My mic is on, right? Yeah. So as Margaret over here said, these facets are really dependent on individuals. So I'm on the incremental side. Like I do not read, I like bullet points. So I take one bullet point, I work on it, I take the second bullet point, and maybe by the third bullet point, I realize I shouldn't have done what I needed to do for the first bullet point. And it's okay, I can backtrack. But that's my style, and that's kind of more on the Tim side and not Abby's side. Computer self-efficacy, I'm smack dab on top of Abby, and this is like confidence and nothing related to competence actually. So confidence is when if Abbies have lower self-confidence and things don't work, they blame themselves and they might quit. That's why it's important to also cater to the lower self-confidence individuals. Attitude towards risk, I'm smack in the middle here. If I'm writing an email to my grad students, I really did not do much, effort on spell checking and writing it in a very nice, deliberate way. I'm writing the email, sending it out. But if I'm writing to the program manager of NSF or somewhere external, I pay a lot more attention. And this is where facets also depend on situations. Exploring, tinkering, I like to click here and click there if I'm sort of confident with low risk, but if it is high risk, then I do not like tinkering. So this is also very situational for me. So what does this mean? How does this facet actually play out? So one example would be that we found from doing field studies with open source teams. The teams looked at their own project, open source project hosted in GitHub. And one of the problems they found here is finding the pull request policy only when you open a new pull request. Other than that, you never find out about the PR policy, only when you go click on a new PR button. So which facets are affected here? Risk aversion, tinkering, so you have to poke, right? So you have to poke on something. But Peggy said here, risk aversion. Here you're poking on something which is a PR policy, which is going to be in the public place and remain forever. So this is a high risk venture you're taking, especially if you're a newcomer and might have lower self-efficacy, right? Anything else? Information processing. Abby wants to know what is it about PR policy, what to do about PR before trying to open a new pull request. And this only comes in when you start hitting on a new pull request. It's like totally not information that is comprehensive. So here's an example where the PR policy coming too late affects almost every facet that Abby has. What this also means is sometimes some of the tool features just doesn't affect one facet, but it kind of compounds. It's affecting other things too, making it much, much harder, much higher cognitive tax that Abby would have to take. This is results that we had done from the field study. We had 5 open source teams looking at their software, and they looked at use cases that were for newcomers. In this case, Abby was a third-year computer science student, and she wanted to start contributing to GitHub so that she could build her profile up to get a job in computer science. So they looked at their projects, looking through use cases like finding a starter task, finding how to do a pull request, things like that. And they went through did the cognitive walkthrough, and they found issues. What we did over here is we categorized these issues into the 6 categories of newcomer barriers that Igor Steinmacher et al. Had found, like on onboarding problems. So we had these 6 categories, and every category we found in our studies. And then there are the problems that the cognitive walkthrough revealed in the tools. But voila, what do we find here is we took each of the issues that the teams found and saw if they actually mentioned any of the cognitive facets. Because remember when Margaret was talking, it was, would Abby be able to do this action? Yes, no, maybe, and why? So when they mentioned a why about a cognitive facet, we marked them up. So anytime an issue has at least one cognitive facet, we mark them. And what do we see over here? For newcomer orientation, 73% of the issues have gender biases. 64, 66%, right? So on average, we found 73% of the issues that the teams found in their own tools had a bias associated with them. This might tell us why there are so few women who are trying to get into getting to open source. We also wanted to find out if the barriers or the gender biases that the teams were finding in their own software were actually triangulating with newcomers. So we looked at the diaries of students. This was a semester-long course, which was an open source. And basically, at the end of the semester, they would have to make a contribution to open source. We looked at the data, and what we found, fewer women than men. So we took 9 women and I believe 14 men to be representative of the ratios of men and women. More women reported barriers than men did when normalized, and more women reported cognitive facets in their barrier than men. So, and these have statistical significances. So clearly newcomers are also facing these cognitive biases. We also triangulated with prior empirical work on gender mag that has found issues with other tools and technologies, and based them down into theoretical models and frameworks, the onboarding literature, as well as the foundations on which gender mag is built. So what other unlevel playing fields exist? Clearly in open source projects there are. Here are other areas where either we have done or other people have run gender mag and found issues. Programming environments, your IDE, spreadsheets, e-learning tools, robots, mobile apps, web help systems, websites, digital libraries, the list goes on. So more often than not, tools seems to be embedding these biases that we are building. Here is data that we picked out from 17 teams that had run gender mag. And The blue bars basically represent the number of gender bias issues per feature that was evaluated. The lowest bar is 12%. The highest bar is 100%. Every feature they looked at had some bias that wasn't there, right? So there's clearly not a single team that had zero. Like every time someone looked at the software, they found a problem. The 100%, right? That's actually good and bad because this was a paper prototype. So the thing to take away is don't wait till a UI is nice and prepared. Start early, because the earlier you find the problems, the easier you can fix it. So hopefully we have convinced you by now that it is important to debias your software. And you're asking, like, how can we do this? We love this thing, right? How can we integrate GenderMag into my own development process, my own teaching? Voila, we have answers. Are you back? No, you're not back. Okay, here we have. Okay, we have been collecting, because we have been looking at a lot of teams by now, commercial, industry, open source, and we have been kind of looking at how are these teams actually using GenderMag. So we have been collecting GenderMag practices. We have a set of 12. We have flyers that we have passed around. Yeah, here I'll give a brief overview of 6 of them. First is GenderMag early, right? Don't wait. And this is the case where we remember that 100% bar that every feature had an issue. So if you start early, you can start fixing them early. Here is one of the team members, one of the teams we looked at. And this data is actually collected from about 10 teams working with OSU IT team as well as our commercial collaborators. Here they say, GenderMag, evaluating what we already have, provides us excellent starting points. We can begin to move the needle at really early points of design. So you're saving time by starting early. And of the teams we looked at, 60% have started looking at GenderMag early. The way we do that is we would have a first session where they do the whole cognitive walkthrough, and you will start with an early design that you have. Second is invite Abby to the office. As Margaret talked about, those personas are really important, right? It is important to channel persona, that she's a newcomer, Abby is a newcomer, or Tim would also be a newcomer. And what are the cognitive facets that Abby has? And the way teams did that, some of them would have the Abby persona with us when they were even doing presentations or training, education trainings or product trainings. Some would keep their slides or pictures of Abby, hang pictures of Abby or the persona on their cubicles. Another team said whenever they do GenderMag, they make people wear these little name tags that said, "Hi, I'm Abby," so that it helps you remember that it's not just you. You won't just go click on this, but what would Abby do? You're channeling Abby. Another team had also said that they actually have these name tags when they do the design discussion, so you can always channel Abby when making decisions of what your feature is allowing a user to do. Debriefing, it's kind of obvious, right? Again, half of the team did that. So typically what we do, we have the GenderMag sessions. We leave last 20 minutes so that people can debrief. And this really helps people kind of take a step back and say like, oh, didn't realize this is what our tools did. Didn't realize our features were so tinkering focused or so like selective processing style. It helps them kind of wrap their heads around and decide how to proceed forward. Here is a quote from a team that says, okay, let's try to schedule another meeting so we have a follow-up meeting so that we have a chance to think about what we saw here today and how to fix this. So oftentimes this debriefing helps go from a bigger team to smaller sub-teams that they can start doing the fixes. Another one, so talking about fixes, so what are the fixes? So one way to do that is categorizing issues. Here is one team that decided to categorize all the issues they found based on layers in their website. So anything on the landing page, let's fix that first, because this was, I believe, their application page. So students who are just post-high school are coming to the page. Let's fix all the issues on the front page, first landing page, and then they start fixing on the second layer. So it's how are you categorizing the issues you found. Another team was looking at label put at bins. So this is all will be fixed with how we train, how to make the training. Some of them are styling consistency or maybe in figure key. This is basically looking at prioritizing and categorizing the issues found so you can fix them. Another way of looking at this is you evaluating UI patterns. It is often the case that because the way the system might have been built supports tinkering. Finding one UI pattern means you will be putting the same UI pattern or the same fixes in other parts. So here it is, it's not just this one dashboard. Even though we have tackled this one dashboard, it's a good starting point for the other dashboards that they had. Some of the other things we found in the sessions are definitely going to apply across the board. So the idea is take some of the more common things, fix it so you can have a benefit going across your other designs. And finally, the one is facet drives fixes. Instead of saying, oh my goodness, I have 100% of my features having problems, or I have so many issues. One way to look at it is, okay, I know we want to help people who are not tinkerers. Let me take one particular facet and try to fix, do the fixes based on that facet. So here, also the facets help you kind of understand how Abby would use the tool. So I guess the principle of navigation for Abby are, as long Abby is confident she's moving through the path, it's not really bad to add another click, right? You can have clicks. You can have Abby doing clicks as long as it's through a guided process, as long as she knows she's making progress to the right path. So that's what's important to keep in mind when generating these fixes. So what were some of these fixes? You're all wondering now. Going back to the problem of the pull request policy coming too late, we had done the study actually in 2017. Since then, GitHub has had this awesome little boxes that gives you upfront guidance. Just a tiny box that says, hey, first time contributing, and this is from the Wiki Education Foundation dashboard. If your first time contributing comes from the pull request part and also from the issues part, want to submit an issue, here is a contributing guideline. Go there, look at it, right? Just a little blurb. And again, this is like, if you know stuff, you can just dismiss it. You don't have to keep looking at it. More specifically, what Wiki Education did was when they were looking at this pull request policy, they found that the information was split across the README, the contributing MD, some at the pull request part, it's like all over the place. So they pulled it all together into the contributing MD, and also they formatted it. So like before opening a pull request, this is what you need to know. This is how you'll do the PR format. And after opening a pull request is what you will need to know. Because also sometimes what happened when they were looking at the walkthrough, there were like 5 different steps. You open a pull request, create pull request, and then 3 more steps or something. It was very confusing, the project teams felt. So they kind of formatted it up so you can learn about it ahead. They also made the PR template a lot more structured and fewer words. Initially, a lot of the information about what to do about the PR formatting and what to do after opening the pull request was here. What they did was make it short and sweet. Have the URLs, because now that if Abby wants to keep this information, she can click on it and keep it on a side window, so she can refer back to it. But having fewer words actually also would help people like Tim, because there's not too much to read. There are fewer bullet points. It just makes it easier. And this is, again, where having this well-structured pull request template helps with Abby as well as Tim, right? It just makes it better for everyone. And now for a case where we actually have validated proof of how it helps.
So if you do these things, this too can be yours. Hashtag awesome graph. So Microsoft Academic is a product from Microsoft Research, and they very kindly allowed us to name the product and the company in our Chi 19 paper. And so what they did is they had this mature product called Microsoft Academic Search, which is similar to a product you all may have run across called Google Scholar. And so it enables you to find research. And so it was a fairly mature product. They had already done their usual stuff to make the product good. So it isn't as though it was brand new. And then they ran Gender Mag on it. And they found a bunch of stuff. And they jumped right off the facets, the same way that Anita just described, to come up with fixes. And then they did an A/B test, the before version versus the after version. It was a between subjects test. So, you know, one group ran the one version, one group ran the other. They had, I've forgotten now, I think it's 6 tasks that they had to perform using this software. In the before version of the software, women failed over twice as often as men at the empirical task. And here again, those were the only two genders that we got data on in that study, because that's all that they declared. In the after version, look at that. The gender gap completely disappeared and everybody got better. Curb cut territory. This can be yours. Woohoo! So what this again points out is that Gender Mag and taking down inclusivity bugs is about inclusivity. It's about taking down barriers so that everyone, regardless of their cognitive style, can succeed. What you don't want to do is basically stamp out cognitive diversity, right? We want software to not try to make everyone the same. Oh, you have to think this way if you're going to be good at software. No, cognitive diversity is good. Let's let it flourish, okay? So take down barriers. It's all about inclusivity. So calls to action. What can you do? So many choices. So if you are involved in education, either in industry training or in the classroom, you can train it and or teach it. We started supports for teachers in the classroom. I'll show you what that looks like. And we just started doing that a year ago, and we're already up to 20 universities that have told us that they're using this stuff, so that's pretty awesome. It turns out that teaching Gender Mag is a very easy fit in a software engineering class, an HCI class, a web design class, a game design class, pretty much anything in which people are supposed to be conjuring up software. It can fit in a lecture, in a homework assignment, in a week. It just depends on, you know, what your course structure is. There are all of these resources available to everybody to download: lecture, slides, homework assignments, all that stuff. And we do hope that if you use any of that stuff and you make it better, that you'll give it back so that other people can build upon your efforts, because it's a community effort. Let's see here. Here's just a little snippet from the Gender Mag Teach piece. It just shows all this different stuff that's available to people who would like to teach it. Perhaps the most important piece is a set of guidelines, gotchas. We published that in ICER last year, which is a computer science education conference. Places where people ran into trouble teaching it and some remedies that they knew about, as well as places where things went swimmingly and how they went swimmingly. So that might be useful to you. Oh yeah, here's a list as of some date. This is a fairly recent list of the people who have told us that they're using it. Isn't that awesome? Oh, OSU is on it. If you would like your university to be on it, feel free to let me know. I would love to add more universities to that list. Okay, but there's more that we can do in academia besides teaching it. So we could actually be walking the talk. A lot of universities say diversity and inclusion is really important to us. And so that's nice. And some universities even try to do something about it. So sometimes they appoint a vice president or a diversity officer or something like that. Sometimes they really get serious and have all kinds of workshops and all kinds of commissions and stuff like that. All those things are great. But how do we talk in academia to each other? Well, the same way we talk in industry to each other, we do it through pixels. All of it is in pixels. It's in our IT, our websites, our web apps, the software that we build, okay? All of that stuff is how we're communicating. And if those communications are gender biased, then no matter what we say we're doing about diversity and inclusion, now we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. So in academia, what we would love is for universities to start cleaning up their own IT. And so we've managed to get one university, OSU, to commit to that in a big way. There's an infographic floating around. And so this year has been our first year piloting. We have, I think we're up to 12 teams now, 12 IT teams around the business side of the university, using it to very good effect. And we're into our second year of getting support to keep making that more systematized in our university. There are a couple of others that are starting to venture down that path, and yours could be next. All of this is free, so there you go. Let's see here.
Can I add one more thing?
But one more thing?
No. Before that, the
Some
IT
other-
part.
some
The
other
previous-
one more thing.
Previous one.
Okay.
We actually had one team come back and talk to us that the number of help requests that they have been getting, support tickets, have reduced after they made the fixes.
Yeah.
After doing the gender max. So
Yeah.
I think that's a super cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, dramatically reduced. In fact, I mean, this is good business. The same way with the curb cuts is good business. Here is a thank you to ACM SigSoft, and especially Joe, who has been one of the movers and shakers in this. And so speaking of cleaning up our own houses, thanks to the encouragement of Tom Zimmerman, who is this year's head of, I guess is more than, yeah, SigSoft, yeah. We've started looking at SigSoft conferences. And so we've been looking at ASE, which Tom is the general chair of, and we looked at ICSE 19, which Joe just managed to emerge from. And we have other conferences that are in the works that are talking about it, have already said they're going to do it, are thinking about doing it. ACM Sig Chi is now starting to think about it as well. So because once again, if the way we talk to our potential attendees at conferences and potential submitters is gender biased, then no matter what we say we care about on gender inclusiveness, we're actually acting in the opposite way. Yes. Yes. Okay. The question was, is it for this piece of the website or that piece of the website or the other piece of the website? And the answer is yes. Anything that's pixels, any website, any web app, any not web app, anything that's software, or for that matter, hardware, can benefit from something like this. So,
the question was, did you actually apply it to Easy Chair?
Oh, no, not yet. But boy, would we love to. Yeah, not yet.
So we applied to the website itself because that's the general chair has access over and control over the content as well as the structure. But going for the registration page or the submission side, that takes one other level of commitment. So we are hoping that we'll get those people to agree.
Yeah, we did get some IEEE people who have some say over those things to attend one of them, and they liked it a lot. So we'll see if there's any follow-up with that. But actually, that does bring up a really important point. If the people who evaluate the software are not the people who are empowered to do something about it, it's a waste of time. So that's why we started with things within the control of the general chair, because that's what they can fix. Yeah. Let's see,
Joe.
maybe Joe can. He'd like to know what changed or what you decided to change, or yeah.
So we did make some changes to the website. I remember, at least with respect to the visa page and travel information page.
We also changed the scheduling because initially it was kind of hard to figure out how to look at the schedule. So I think you changed the front page.
That's right, and maybe even the front page of the like our registration page before going into CVent's registration page.
And something as simple or like trivial, like I think the first picture was the pictures are so big that the most of the text was kind of.
Yeah, I don't think we changed that because that was not under our control. That's part of the framework.
Right. I remember that Tom was very inspired about needing a sort of an organization that would be just for newcomers on the website.
A page that would be for newcomers from industry, newcomers
Right.
for students. Catering to newcomers so that they will know what the conference, the community is about.
Yeah, and Joe, you had some amazing statistic about how many ICSE attendees are newcomers. It was over
50%, almost 50%.
50%, yeah. So attending to newcomers to a conference is a huge deal.
That's right.
Yeah.
We just did a little retrospective and we found across the 7 sessions we ran, Joe and Tom had come up with like 20, 25 suggestions that they would want to implement in future venues or conferences.
Yeah.
So we can keep collecting that and actually make it available to SigSoft and
Yeah, and the ASE stuff, that was earlier in its life cycle. So that stuff is already starting to happen in the current one. So if you are the general chair of a conference, feel free to use this on your own or let us know, we'll help you because we're interested in changing the world here. Do you have a question?
Earlier is better.
Earlier is better, yes, because if you try to do it a week before the conference, it's like everybody's already made their decisions.
So one of the things I noticed at one of the universities is Beijing, and so I'm curious, was there any differences that were showing up from personas that they mapped from the equivalent of Abby there?
You know, that's a great question. The
At the
question,
University of Beijing.
yeah, the question was about the personas, the way they use them in Beijing versus other places we've seen, and the answer is I have no idea because that wasn't me. Gender Mag is a freely downloadable thing, so anyone can do it. And so the person that taught it there is the one who knows that. But I was there in Namibia, which is a country in Africa, in case you don't know. And they use the personas in ways we would expect, in ways very similar to the way we use them here. So the top part, the background, is customizable, so they would make it students at their university, you know, with whatever background is appropriate, but that works fine. And the cognitive styles, of course, those are fixed and they worked out fine for them. Okay, so what you can do, you can train it, you can teach it, you can use it on your software, you can help us with our kind of awful tool. So we have this note-taking assistant called the Gender Mag Recorder's Assistant that we've been working on. It needs a lot of help. It's an open source project. If you are the type who likes to spend your spare hours, if indeed you know what those are, doing stuff on open source, then feel free to pitch in, because that's going to be really helpful for people doing distributed versions of Gender Mag. So that would be awesome. If you are a researcher, you can apply it, extend it, blend it, study it, and automate it, leading no doubt to Best Paper Awards, because why wouldn't it? You can help us with our emerging best practices. So the ones that we've talked about, these were process practices. That's what's on this handout. And a present for Andy. One of the things Andy said a while back is, I'm ready to use it when you give me some fixes that come with it. So we have those. They're not published yet, but we do have them in archive. We also have a paper based on these practices in archive. So you all can find stuff like that that you can actually use, at least the beginning pieces. There's still a long way to go on them though. So please feel free to join us in any way you can, collaborate. In conclusion, debiasing your software and tools pays off. Pays off in business, pays off in the classroom, it pays off in making your software and tools better, and it pays off in society. It's like everybody wins. Here's what one user of Gender Mag said. They said, it gave me a way to think, to address issues that will benefit everybody. In their experience, though, what they were particularly worried about was why women weren't buying their software, and so they say, but especially women. And another participant said, it changed the way I think. So that's it. We're open for questions.
I've seen this before at the IT University of Copenhagen, and I really love this project. I'm very interested in how you decided to use personas, and if the use of personas also helped sort of selling the idea of a product to people.
That's a great question. Okay, so the question was, why are we using personas, and what caused us to do that, and does it help in selling it? So we tried it with personas, without personas, and then with personas again. And so, as in much other research, we learned by making mistakes. So we started with personas that were not really as well thought out as they should have been. They didn't work out that well, so then we tried it without personas, and then somebody who really knew what they were doing with personas said, I think we have a better way. So we started doing personas that were more carefully thought out, and that led us to do a lot of digging into personas. And I know that you know a lot about this, but perhaps some other people don't. And so there's a whole psychology behind personas. It turns out that a persona is so much more helpful in getting people to really empathize and care and internalize whoever it is you're trying to represent than just bullet points, because it sort of triggers this whole theory of mind capability that people have, which is our ability to predict, to form models, executable models in our brains of how somebody will react. So like, some of you have never met me before, but you have a mental model in your head on what might happen if you were, for example, to argue with me, and you say, I know what she's like, I bet I know what she's going to do. You might be right and you might be wrong, but you've already got a model. And so if instead there was this list of bullet points about me, you probably wouldn't have that model. So we now believe that personas are really critical to making this work because it's about inclusivity.
Also, what we found, okay, I don't know, can you hear me? Also, what we found is like having the persona, having the picture really helped the team to channel Abby. Sometimes they would go off and then they would pick up Abby and say, look, this is the persona, this is her facet. It's not just what you would do or what a user would do. It really helps during the discussions to bring the focus back to the facets because of the persona.
Yes. Sorry, I'm not supposed
That's
to
sort
point.
of a related question. I mean, it might sort of be answered by that, but there's not a lot of research, empirical research on the value of personas. And I'm curious, like, your thoughts on the importance of that versus the scenario, because you did this. I mean, it seemed like the scenario and challenging their assumptions after each step seemed pretty important. So just actually having them walk through a task.
Okay, so the question was, is there research into personas, and is that more important than the scenarios or vice versa? So the answer is there is a lot of research into personas, and the personas and the scenarios aren't an either or. You use the persona with the scenario. So back to the question about research into personas, there's because they're widely used in industry and also controversial in the industry, there's been a lot of research, especially in the HCI community, about them. And some people come down in favor and some people come down against. But the research that I've seen on it that impresses me the most basically helps me to understand that usually the problems with personas are because the personas haven't been set up that carefully. And so there's a book I really swear by called, I forget what it's called, but it's by Adlin and Pruitt, probably Guide to Personas or something. It's a really good book, and it tells you how to do it right, and some of the pitfalls you can run into if you don't do it right. And so we've also investigated the use of our personas and have found that they're way more used than typically the literature says that they are. We also, and then one of our colleagues, well, she's a German person who is a collaborator, not really a colleague, but we collaborated on a couple of things, and she's a persona expert. And so she's got 3 or 4 papers out now on the gender mag personas. So she finds some hiccups here and there, but in general, her findings are quite positive.
Can I just add? It's still the persona thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's something with your pictures, right? So I mean, they're all white people, and
no, they're not. They're not.
It looks
not,
like
not.
that. They look very white. Maybe they're not, but they look very white.
So
I was, but I was also wondering.
No, but they are not. Let's see.
They look white.
Yeah,
So
no,
maybe
they're not
it's
all
just
white.
me then. But I think there's also something about the choice of names, right? So why wouldn't you choose like having, gender neutral names? So if they all were called like, I don't know, Andrea, like we had earlier, right? Yeah. So the idea, because I think there is something that when you keep on talking, we have to make technology for Abby. Mm-hmm. I keep on having this stereotypical idea that women are not, into, tinkering. And even though you show, Anita, that you have a different personality than Abby, we keep on having this Abby as this poor stereotypical woman we need to help. And I feel problematic with that.
Okay, sure. It's a great question. So the first thing to notice is this Abby has 4 people whose skins are all different colors. The large picture is indeed Caucasian. The small upper picture is African American. The one in the middle is actually Asian from India, and the one at the bottom is Asia from, I think, Japan. But it is true that even the African American doesn't, you have to know she's African American to be able to tell she's African American, and so it seems like we need to work harder at finding people whose skin color is clearer than these, because they are definitely not supposed to all look white. Second thing is, Abby is in this particular version, we just show the short form of their name, but actually it's short for, well, it can be short for a lot of different things. So it actually is a gender neutral name. Abhishek, I think, is the male version, and Abigail is the female version. And we've chosen all the names in that way. So we have Abby, we have Pat, and we have Tim, and there's also a man version and a woman version of the Tim name. So, and you'll also notice that all the pictures always include people of different genders. And so there's no reason why Abby has to be a woman. Now, we've been talking a lot about Abby because we're trying to be concrete, so we've picked just one of our personas. But there are 3. People can do this with Tim, they can do it with Pat. And in fact, in the ideal setting, they do everything with Abby, they do everything with Tim, and they do everything with Pat so that they can compare the differences. And they use identical backgrounds with them so that they're really paying attention to the cognitive style differences. So that would be the ideal thing if people had enough time to do all those. But if they only have time for one, we generally recommend that they start with Abby because it's the strongest magnifying glass on stuff that usually gets overlooked. So no matter which persona you use, you will find gender biases. And they aren't always biases against women either. All of them will reveal something, but Abby typically reveals the most. So it gives you the most bang for your time.
A quick follow-up. Before we had the 4-picture Abby, we had a single picture Abby with the main picture. And we did find like during the session, they would be channeling Abby and the facet, but some people would stereotype outside and say women don't do this or women don't do that. So what we did was we had this 4-picture persona, and we actually did a study to see like single picture persona versus the 4-picture persona. And one of the questions we had was at the end of the study, name a friend who is like Abby. And with the 4-picture persona, we saw no gender differences. So
it was so awesome. Yeah, it was like, okay, it's like what you'd like for a question like that is for the number of men to be exactly the same as the number of women when they're naming their friends like Abby. And that's what we had. And also naming people very different from Abby. We got that again, this identical graph thing. And we also had asked why. And so we filtered out all the ones, that were about, oh, same hair color or whatever, and just kept the ones that were talking about their cognitive styles. And still we got that. And so in that paper.
And we found no difference between this, it was a student study. So men versus women in the study, they were the same.
Oh, yeah. We controlled for all that stuff. Yeah. And the really awesome thing is we had a stereotyping expert involved in that study. And what we found out is with either version of the personas, either the 4-tuple or the single picture, people stereotype less with the personas than they do with real people, which we thought was awesome. So, yeah. No, that's a Chi 17 paper, by the way, if you'd like to take a look. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a very basic question. So the concepts of this persona can be applied to any type of inclusion. So culture or age or anything. So
Absolutely.
Why you are calling it a gender mag?
Okay, very good question. So the question is, we could use this on any diversity that we can think of. So why would we call it gender mag? And there are sort of 3 answers to this question. So one answer is gender mag actually has a parent. So it is a famous child, but its less famous parent is called inclusive mag. And inclusive mag has not yet been published, but we do have a paper in archive, so you can look it up. It is a meta method that generated gender mag. So now let me get to what about gender mag really has to do with gender. So where these 5 cognitive facets came from is literature about gender differences in cognitive styles. Keep in mind, again, these are really all about individual differences, lots of differences within any one gender, but clusters that you have to pay attention to if you're trying to design, say, an inclusive classroom or an inclusive process or inclusive software or whatever. So what we did is we picked 5 of those facets from all of that literature that clearly had implications for software and that were extremely well established in the literature. And so we ended up, oh, and the third category, the third criterion was had to be grokkable by ordinary software developers with no background in HCI, no background in psychology, no background in gender studies. So that's where these 5 came from. So if we then tried to apply these 5 to, say, for example, age inclusiveness, it wouldn't do any harm, okay? I mean, yeah, motivations, computer self-efficacy, attitude toward risk, that can never do any harm. But it wouldn't do the job really well either, because one of the facets we'd really want to think about in age inclusiveness is, say, for example, working memory. And that's not up there. So these 5 were chosen because they were so well established as being so important for cognitive inclusiveness for gender. So they do no harm, but you can do better if you're really trying to be serious. But then you have to go back to the literature and really pick the right facets. So yeah.
Okay, we can take some more questions offline, but for now, let's thank.
Oh,
Anita and
did we
Margaret.
use up all our time?
Yes,
Oh,
and some
bummer.
more. I didn't have time for it.